The devil is dead, and the blight is ended. We believed that the Nerevarine prophecies were false. You have slain Dagoth-Ur and his kin, and have proven us wrong. Accept our apologies, and our thanks, Nerevarine. So good to see you.
What can I do for you? Almalexia is one of the gods worshipped by the Dunmer in the Tribunal Temple. Nonsense. You don't know what you're talking about.
Go ahead.
Is there something I can do for you?
night is gone, and we have survived. Now we must dedicate ourselves to rebuilding the temple, and you must dedicate yourself to your responsibilities as protector of Morrowind. That is very sad. I presume she killed Sothasil. I thought she might harm me, and I presume she tried to kill you, Nerevarine. It is all very sad, but death comes to all mortals, and we are all mortal now. In time, death will come to me, Nerevarine, perhaps even at your hands. It is futile to deny one's fate, but nonetheless, I'm afraid I find it all very, very sad that it should end this way, something that began in such glory and noble promise. Along with Lord Nerevar, and at his insistence, Almalexia, Sothasil, and I swore before our god of oaths at the time, the Daedra Lord Azura, never to employ the tools of Kagranok for any purpose. We broke our oaths. We turned our backs.
Yes, I'm Blada Hateria. Do I know you? Right, you're them. My friend said you might want to go fishing. I'm ready to take you to Holamayan anytime you're ready to travel.
I'm Vivrana Arian, a monk of Holamayan. I can arrange for your return.
Greetings.
What can I do for you?
Care to see the sights? Where can I take you?
Is there something you need? Welcome to Hlauhad, stranger. I'm Bellini Salavel, Hlauhad's shipmaster, at your service. Welcome to Nar Mok, Outlander. It's small but dumpy, and I'm not... Yes, Outlander, what do you want?
Greetings. Are you in need of transport? Severe will gladly take you to Fort Frostmoth in Solstheim for a small fee.
I can't talk now. I'm waiting for our escort to show up. Besides, Gidar is in charge. Is there something I can do for you?
Pardon me, but I'm waiting for someone.
Sorry, can't talk right now. We're waiting for our escort to Raven Rock. Go see Carnius Magius in the shrine if you need something. Yes, Outlander. What do you want?
So I said, where's the money in that? What do you want? Go see Captain Carius. He's in his chambers at the fort. Head through the general quarters and all the way up the south staircase. On the 3rd floor are his chambers. If you're here about that colony business, talk to Carnius Magius. He's in the Imperial Cult Shrine.
What is this? What do you want? Go see Captain Carius. What is this regarding? Yes, Breton? Yes, Breton? Yes? What can I do for you? I am Captain Falx, commander of Fort Frostmoth. Yes? What can I do for you? I am Captain Falx, commander of Fort Frostmoth. We are an Imperial fort, obviously. My soldiers have the ability to be among the best in all the Empire. This island of Solstheim is not the easiest assignment, though, and sometimes it makes the men edgy. As I said, this is a difficult post. These soldiers are separated from their families and forced to live in harsh conditions. To be fair, most of these men were sent to this island as punishment for a past offense. They are not the best of soldiers. Yet. Still, until recently they had performed their duties adequately. Lately I have noticed some disturbing trends. To be sure, the men have been restless, complaining more than usual. They have been lackadaisical in the performance of their duties. I sense a great unease among them, and morale has been low. Very low. This is not normal. My instinct tells me that there is one among my troops who is fanning the fires of this discontent, and I wish to know who it is. They will never let me know who the culprit is. As their commanding officer, I must regretfully keep some distance between these fine soldiers and myself. They may be willing to speak with you, though. See if you can't gain their trust. If you learn anything, report to me. All the garrisons are presently at full strength, except perhaps the Deathshed Legion at Fort Darius, in the West Gash near the village of Nesis. If you're interested, you'll have to talk to General Darius there. I am Captain Falx, commander of Fort Frost. You will find him in the Imperial Cult Shrine, where he has been granted permission to keep an office. The Dunmer goddess? Can't say I know much about her. There's some talk sometimes, but it takes a while for news to travel here. I asked you to investigate why the morale has been low in the fort. Have you learned anything?
Scene, the Imperial City, Cyrodiil. Date, 7 Frostfall, 3rd Era, 397. It seemed as if the palace had always housed the Atreus Building Commission, the company of clerks and estate agents who authored and notarized nearly every construction of any note in the Empire. It had stood for 250 years, since the reign of the Emperor Magnus, a plain-fronted and austere hall on a minor but respectable plaza in the Imperial City. Energetic and ambitious middle-class lads and ladies worked there, as well as complacent middle-aged ones like Decumus Scotti. No one could imagine a world without the Commission, least of all Scotti. To be accurate, he could not imagine a world without himself in the Commission. Lord Atreus is perfectly aware of your contributions, said the managing clerk, closing the shutter that demarcated Scotty's office behind him. But you know that things have been difficult. Yes, said Scotty stiffly. Lord Vannick's men have been giving us a lot of competition lately, and we must be more efficient if we are to survive. Unfortunately, that means releasing some of our historically best, but presently underachieving senior clerks. I understand. Can't be helped. I'm glad that you understand, smiled the managing clerk, smiling thinly and withdrawing. Please have your room cleared immediately. Scotty began the task of organizing all his work to pass on to his successor. It would probably be young Imbralius who would take most of it on, which was as it should be, he considered philosophically. The lad knew how to find business. Scotty wondered idly what the fellow would do with the contracts for the new statue of St. Alessia for which the Temple of the One had applied. Probably invent a clerical error, blame it on his old predecessor, Decumus Scotty, and require an additional cost to rectify. I have correspondence for Decumus Scotty of the Atreus Building Commission. Scotty looked up. A fat-faced courier had entered his office and was thrusting forth a sealed scroll. He handed the boy a gold piece and opened it up. By the poor penmanship, atrocious spelling and grammar, and overall unprofessional tone, it was manifestly evident who the writer was. Leodes Jurus, a fellow clerk some years before, who had left the commission after being accused of unethical business practices. Dear Scotty, I imagine you always wondered what happened to me, and the last place you would have expected to find me is out in the woods. But that's exactly where I am. Ha ha. If you're smart and want to make a lot of extra gold for Lord Atreus, and yourself, ha ha, you'll come down to Valenwood too. If you haven't or have been following the politics here lately, you may or may not know that there's been a war between the Boschmer and their neighbours elsewhere over the past 2 years. Things have only just calmed down, and there's a lot that needs to be rebuilt. Now, I've got more business than I can handle, but I need someone with some clout, someone representing a respected agency to get the quill in the ink. That Somone is you, my fiend. Come and meet me at the Mother Pascos Tavern in Falinesti, Valenwood. It'll be here 2 weeks, and you won't be sorry. Juris P.S. Bring a wagon-load of timber if you can. What do you have there, Scotty? Asked a voice. Scotty started. It was Imbralius, his damnably handsome face peeking through the shutters, smiling in that way that melted the hearts of the stingiest of patrons and the roughest of stonemasons. Scotty shoved the letter in his jacket pocket. Personal correspondence, he sniffed. I'll be cleared up here in just a moment. I don't want to hurry you, said Imbralius, grabbing a few sheets of blank contracts from Scotty's desk. I've just gone through a stack, and the junior scribe's hands are all cramping up, so I thought you wouldn't miss a few. The lad vanished. Scotty retrieved the letter and read it again. He thought about his life, something he rarely did. It seemed a sea of grey with a black, insurmountable wall looming. There was only one narrow passage he could see in that wall. Quickly, before he had a moment to reconsider it, he grabbed a dozen of the blank contracts with the shimmering gold leaf Atreus Building Commission by appointment of His Imperial Majesty, and hid them in the satchel with his personal effects. The next day he began his adventure with a giddy lack of hesitation. He arranged for a seat in a caravan bound for Valenwood, the single escorted conveyance to the southeast, leaving the imperial city that week. He had scarcely hours to pack, but he remembered to purchase a wagon-load of timber. It will be extra gold to pay for a horse to pull that, frowned the convoy head. So I anticipated, smiled Scotty, with his best Imbralius grin. 10 wagons in all set off that afternoon through the familiar Cyrodiilic countryside. Past fields of wildflowers, gently rolling woodlands, friendly hamlets. The clop of the horses' hooves against the soundstone road reminded Scotty that the Atreus Building Commission constructed it. 5 of the 18 necessary contracts for its completion were drafted by his own hand. "Very smart of you to bring that wood along," said a grey-whiskered Breton man next to him on his wagon. "You must be in commerce." "Of a sort," said Scotty, in a way he hoped was mysterious, before introducing himself. "Decumus Scotty." "Griff Mallon," said the man. "I'm a poet, actually a translator of old Bosmer literature. I was researching some newly discovered tracts of the Menoriad play bar 2 years ago when the war broke out and I had to leave. You are no doubt familiar with the Menoriad if you're aware of the Green Pact." Scotty thought the man might be speaking perfect gibberish, but he nodded his head. "Naturally. I don't pretend that the Menoriad is as renowned as the Me Elidian or as ancient as the Dansir Gol, but I think it has a remarkable significance to understanding the nature of the Merolithic Bosmer mind. The origin of the wood elf aversion to cutting their own wood or eating any plant material at all, yet paradoxically their willingness to import plant stuff from other cultures, I feel can be linked to a passage in the Menoriad." Malin shuffled through some of his papers, searching for the appropriate text. To Scotty's vast relief, the carriage soon stopped to camp for the night. They were high on a bluff over a grey stream, and before them was the great valley of Valenwood. Only the cry of seabirds declared the presence of the ocean to the bay to the west. Here the timber was so tall and wide, twisting around itself like an impossible knot begun eons ago, to be impenetrable. A few more modest trees, only 50 feet to the lowest branches, stood on the cliff at the edge of camp. The sight was so alien to Scotty, and he found himself so anxious about the proposition of entering the wilderness, that he could not imagine sleeping. Fortunately, Malin had supposed he had found another academic with a passion for the riddles of ancient cultures. Long into the night he recited Bosmer verse in the original and in his own translation, sobbing and bellowing and whispering wherever appropriate. Gradually Scotty began to feel drowsy, but a sudden crack of wood snapping made him sit straight up. "What was that?" Malin smiled. "I like it too. Convocation in the malignity of the moonless speculum, a dance of fire. There are some enormous birds up in the trees moving around," whispered Scotty, pointing in the direction of the dark shapes above. "I wouldn't worry about that," said Malin, irritated with his audience. "Now listen to how the poet characterizes Hermamora's invocation in the 18th stanza of the 4th book. The dark shapes in the trees were some of them perched like birds, others slithered like snakes, and still others stood up straight like men." As Malin recited his verse, Scotty watched the figures softly leap from branch to branch, half gliding across impossible distances for anything without wings. They gathered in groups and then reorganized until they had spread to every tree around the camp. Suddenly they plummeted from the heights. "Mara!" cried Scotty. "They're falling like rain." "Probably seed pods," Malin shrugged, not turning around. "Some of the trees have remarkable—" The camp erupted into chaos. Fires burst out in the wagons. The horses wailed from mortal blows. Casks of wine, fresh water and liquor gushed their contents to the ground. A nimble shadow dashed past Scotty and Malin, gathering sacks of grain and gold with impossible agility and grace. Scotty had only one glance at it, lit up by a sudden nearby burst of flame. It was a sleek creature with pointed ears, wide yellow eyes, mottled pied fur, and a tail like a whip. "Werewolf," he whimpered, shrinking back. "Cathay rot," groaned Malin. "Much worse. Khajiiti cousins or some such thing come to plunder." "Are you sure?" As quickly as they struck, the creatures retreated, diving off the bluff before the battle mage, and night, the caravan's escorts, had fully opened their eyes. Malin and Scotty ran to the precipice and saw 100 feet below the tiny figures dash out of the water, shake themselves, and disappear into the wood. "Werewolves aren't acrobats like that," said Malin. "They were definitely Cathay rot, bastard thieves. Thanks Stendar they didn't realize the value of my notebooks. It wasn't a complete loss." It was a complete loss. The Cathay rat had stolen or destroyed almost every item of value in the caravan in just a few minutes' time. Decimus Scotty's wagon-load of wood he had hoped to trade with the Bosmer had been set on fire and then toppled off the bluff. His clothing and contracts were tattered and ground into the mud of dirt mixed with spilt wine. All the pilgrims, merchants, and adventurers in the group moaned and wept as they gathered the remnants of their belongings by the rising sun of the dawn. I best not tell anyone that I managed to hold on to my notes for my translation of the Menoriad play bar, whispered the poet Griff Mallon. They'd probably turn on me. Scotty politely declined the opportunity of telling Mallon just how little value he himself placed on the man's property. Instead, he counted the coins in his purse. 34 gold pieces. Very little indeed for an entrepreneur beginning a new business. "Hoy!" came a cry from the wood. A small party of Bosmer emerged from the thicket, clad in leather mail and bearing arms. "Friend or foe?" "Neither," growled the convoy head. "You must be the Cyrodiils," laughed the leader of the group, a tall, skeleton-thin youth with a sharp, vulpine face. "We heard you were en route. Evidently so did our enemies." "I thought the war was over," muttered one of the caravan's now ruined merchants. The Bosmer laughed again. "No act of war, just a little border enterprise. You're going on to Falinesti?" "I'm not." The convoy head shook his head. "As far as I'm concerned, my duty is done. No more horses, no more caravan, just a fat profit loss to me." The men and women crowded around the man, protesting, threatening, begging, but he refused to step foot in Valenwood. If these were the new times of peace, he said, he'd rather come back for the next war. Scotty tried a different route and approached the Bosmer. He spoke with an authoritative but friendly voice, the kind he used in negotiations with peevish carpenters. "I don't suppose you'd consider escorting me to Falinesti. I'm a representative for an important imperial agency, the Atreus Building Commission, here to help repair and alleviate some of the problems the war with the Khajiit brought to your province. Patriotism. 20 gold pieces, and you must carry your own gear if you have any left," replied the Bosmer. Scotty reflected that negotiations with peevish carpenters rarely went his way either. 6 eager people had enough gold on them for payment. Among those without funds was the poet, who appealed to Scotty for assistance. "I'm sorry, Griff, I only have 14 gold left over. Not even enough for a decent room when I get to Falinesti. I really would help you if I could," said Scotty, persuading himself that it was true. The band of 6 and their Bosmer escorts began the descent down a rocky path along the bluff. Within an hour's time they were deep in the jungles of Valenwood. A never-ending canopy of hues of browns and greens obscured the sky. A millennia's worth of fallen leaves formed a deep, wormy sea of putrefaction beneath their feet. Several miles were crossed, wading through the slime. For several more they took a labyrinthian path across fallen branches and the low-hanging boughs of giant trees. All the while, hour after hour, the inexhaustible Bosmer host moved so fast the Cyrodiils struggled to keep from being left behind. A red-faced little merchant with short legs took a bad step on a rotten branch and nearly fell. His fellow provincials had to help him up. The Bosmer paused only a moment, their eyes continually darting to the shadows in the trees above, before moving on at their usual expeditious pace. "What are they so nervous about?" wheezed the merchant irritably. "More Cathay rot?" "Don't be ridiculous," laughed the Bosmer unconvincingly. "Khajiiti this far into Valenwood, in times of peace? They'd never dare." When the group passed high enough above the swamp that the smell was somewhat dissipated, Scotty felt a sudden pang of hunger. He was used to 4 meals a day in the Cyrodiilic custom. Hours of non-stop exertion without food was not part of his regimen as a comfortably paid clerk. He pondered, feeling somewhat delirious, how long they had been trotting through the jungle. 12 hours? 20? A week? Time was meaningless. Sunlight was only sporadic through the vegetative ceiling. Phosphorescent moulds on the trees and in the muck below provided the only regular illumination. "Is it at all possible for us to rest and eat?" he hollered to his host up ahead. "We're near to Falinesti," came the echoing reply. "Lots of food there." The path continued upward for several hours more across a clot of fallen logs, rising up to the first and then the second boughs of the tree line. As they rounded a long corner, the travellers found themselves midway up a waterfall that fell 100 feet or more. No one had the energy to complain as they began pulling up the stacks of rock, agonizing foot by foot. The Bosmer escorts disappeared into the mist, but Scotty kept climbing until there was no more rock left. He wiped the sweat and river water from his eyes. Falinesti spread across the horizon before him. Sprawling across both banks of the river stood the mighty Grat Oak city, with groves and orchards of lesser trees crowding it like supplicants before their king. At a lesser scale, the tree that formed the moving city would have been extraordinary, gnarled and twisted with a gorgeous crown of gold and green, dripping with vines and shining with sap. At a mile tall and half as wide, it was the most magnificent thing Scotty had ever seen. If he had not been a starving man with the soul of a clerk, he would have sung. "There you are," said the leader of the escorts. "Not too far a walk. You should be glad it's wintertide. In summertide, the city's on the far south end of the province." Scotty was lost as to how to proceed. The sight of the vertical metropolis where people moved about like ants disoriented all his sensibilities. You wouldn't know of an inn called... He paused for a moment and then pulled Eurus's letter from his pocket. Something like Mother Pascost Tavern. Mother Pascost? The lead Bosmer laughed his familiar contemptuous laugh. "You won't want to stay there. Visitors always prefer the Asia Hall in the top bows. It's expensive, but very nice. I'm meeting someone at Mother Pascost's Tavern. If you've made up your mind to go, take a lift to Havel Slump and ask for directions there. Just don't get lost and fall asleep in the Western Cross." This apparently struck the youth's friends as a very witty jest, and so it was with their laughter echoing behind him that Scotty crossed the writhing root system to the base of Falinesti. The ground was littered with leaves and refuse, and from moment to moment a glass or a bone would plummet from far above, so he walked with his neck crooked to have warning. An intricate network of platforms anchored to thick vines slipped up and down the slick trunk of the city with perfect grace, manned by operators with arms as thick as an ox's belly. Scotty approaches the nearest fellow at one of the platforms, who was idly smoking from a glass pipe. "I was wondering if you might take me to Havel Slump." The Mer nodded, and within a few minutes' time Scotty was 200 feet in the air at a crook between two mighty branches. Curled webs of moss stretched unevenly across the fork, forming a sharing roof for several dozen small buildings. There were only a few souls in the alley, but around the bend ahead he could hear the sound of music and people. Scotty tipped the Falinesti platform ferryman a gold piece and asked for the location of Mother Pascost's Tavern. "Straight ahead of you, sir, but you won't find anyone there," the ferryman explained, pointing in the direction of the noise. "Maundas everyone in Havel Slump has revelry." Scotty walked carefully along the narrow street. Though the ground felt as solid as the marble avenues of the imperial city, there were slick cracks in the bark that exposed fatal drops into the river. He took a moment to sit down, to rest and get used to the view from the heights. It was a beautiful day for certain, but it took Scotty only a few minutes of contemplation to rise up in alarm. A jolly little raft anchored downstream below him had distinctly moved several inches while he watched it, but it hadn't moved at all. He had, together with everything around him. It was no metaphor. The city of Falinesti walked, and considering its size, it moved quickly. Scotty rose to his feet and into a cloud of smoke that drifted out from around the bend. It was the most delicious roast he had ever smelled. The clerk forgot his fear and ran. The revelry, as the ferryman had termed it, took place on an enormous platform tied to the tree, wide enough to be a plaza in any other city. A fantastic assortment of the most amazing people Scotty had ever seen were jammed shoulder to shoulder together, many eating, many more drinking, and some dancing to a lutist and singer perched on an offshoot above the crowd. They were largely Bosmer, true natives clad in colourful leather and bones, with a close minority of orcs. Whirling through the throng, dancing and bellowing at one another, were a hideous ape people. A few heads bobbing over the tops of the crowd belonged not, as Scotty first assumed, to very tall people, but to a family of centaurs. "Care for some mutton?" queried a wizened old Mer, who roasted an enormous beast on some red-hot rocks. Scotty quickly paid him a gold piece and devoured the leg he was given, and then another gold piece and another leg. The fellow chuckled when Scotty began choking on a piece of gristle and handed him a mug of a frothing white drink. He drank it and felt a quiver run through his body as if he were being tickled. "What is that?" Scotty asked. "Jagger, fermented pig's milk. I can let you have a flagon of it and a bit more mutton for another gold." Scotty agreed, paid, gobbled down the meat, and took the flagon with him as he slipped into the crowd. His co-worker, Liodes Eurus, the man who had told him to come to Valenwood, was nowhere to be seen. When the flagon was a quarter empty, Scotty stopped looking for Eurus. When it was half empty, he was dancing with the group, oblivious to the broken planks and gaps in the fencework. At 3/4 empty, he was trading jokes with a group of creatures whose language was completely alien to him. By the time the flagon was completely drained, he was asleep, snoring, while the revelry continued on all around his supine body. The next morning, still asleep, Scotty had the sensation of someone kissing him. He made a face to return the favour, but a pain-like fire spread through his chest and forced him to open his eyes. There was an insect the size of a large calf sitting on him, crushing him, its spiky legs holding him down, while a central spiral-bladed vortex of a mouth tore through his shirt. He screamed and thrashed, but the beast was too strong. It had found its meal, and it was going to finish it. "It's over," thought Scotty wildly. "I should have never left home. I could have stayed in the city and perhaps found work with Lord Vanek. I could have begun again as a junior clerk and worked my way back up." Suddenly the mouth released itself. The creature shivered once, expelled a burst of yellow bile, and died. "Got one!" cried a voice, not too distantly. For a moment Scotty lay still. His head throbbed and his chest burned. Out of the corner of his eye he saw movement. Another of the horrible monsters was scurried towards him. He scrambled, trying to push himself free, but before he could come out, there was a sound of a bough cracking, and an arrow pierced the second insect. "Good shot!" cried another voice. "Get the first one again! I just saw it move a little." This time, Scotty felt the impact of the bolt hit the carcass. He cried out, but he could hear how muffled his voice was by the beetle's body. Cautiously, he tried sliding a foot out and rolling under, but the movement apparently had the effect of convincing the archers that the creature still lived. A volley of arrows was launched forth. Now the beast was sufficiently perforated, so pools of its blood, and likely the blood of its victims, began to seep out onto Scotty's body. When Scotty was a lad, before he grew too sophisticated for such sports, he had often gone to the imperial arena for the competitions of war. He recalled a great veteran of the fights, when asked, telling him his secret, "Whenever I'm in doubt of what to do, and I have a shield, I stay behind it." Scotty followed that advice. After an hour, when he no longer heard arrows being fired, he threw aside the remains of the bug and leapt as quickly as he could to a stand. It was not a moment too soon. A gang of 8 archers had their bows pointing his direction, ready to fire. When they saw him, they laughed. "Didn't anyone ever tell you not to sleep in the Western Cross? How are we going to exterminate all the Horvers if you drunks keep feeding 'em?" Scotty shook his head and walked back along the platform, round the bend, to Harville's slump. He was bloodied and torn and tired, and he had far too much fermented pig's milk. All he wanted was a proper place to lie down. He stepped into Mother Pascost's tavern, a dank place, wet with sap, smelling of mildew. "My name is Decimus Scotty," he said. "I was hoping you have someone named Eurus staying here." "Decimus Scotty," pondered the fleshy proprietress, Mother Pascost herself. "I've heard that name. Oh, you must be the fellow he left the note for. Let me go see if I can find it." Mother Pascost disappeared into the sordid hole that was her tavern, and emerged a moment later with a scrap of paper with Leodes Jurus's familiar scrawl. Decimus Scotty held it up before a patch of sunlight that had found its way through the massive boughs of the tree city, and read, "Scotty, so you made it to Falinesti Valenwood. Congratulations. I'm sure you had quit your adventure getting here. Unfortunately, I'm not here any more, as you probably guess. There's a town downriver called Athi Imat. Get a boat and join me. It's ideal. I hope you brought a lot of contracts, because these people need a lot of building done. They were close to the war, you see, but not so close they don't have any money left to pay. Ha ha. Meet me down here as soon as you can. Jurus. So, Scotty pondered, Jurus had left Falinesti and gone to some place called Athi. Given his poor penmanship and ghastly spelling, it could equally well be Athi, Afi, Othri, Imthri, Urtha, or Krakamaka. The sensible thing to do, Scotty knew, was to call this adventure over and try to find some way to get back home to the Imperial City. He was no mercenary devoted to a life of thrills. He was, or at least had been, a senior clerk at a successful private building commission. Over the last few weeks he had been robbed by the Cathay Rat, taken on a death march through the jungle by a gang of giggling Bosmiri, half-starved to death, drugged with fermented pig's milk, nearly slain by some kind of giant tick, and attacked by archers. He was filthy, exhausted, and had, he counted, 10 gold pieces to his name. Now the man whose proposal brought him to the depths of misery was not even there. It was both judicious and seemly to abandon the enterprise entirely, and yet a small but distinct voice in his head told him, "You have been chosen. You have no other choice but to see this through." Scotty turned to the stout old woman, Mother Pascost, who had been watching him curiously. "I was wondering if you knew of a village that was at the edge of the recent conflict with Elsewhere. It's called something like Athi." "You must mean Athay," she grinned. "My middle lad, Viglil, he manages a dairy down there. Beautiful country, right on the river. Is that where your friend went?" "Yes," said Scotty. "Do you know the fastest way to get there?" After a short conversation, an even shorter ride to Falinesti's roots by way of the platforms, and a jog to the riverbank, Scotty was negotiating transport with a huge fair-haired Bosmer with a face like a pickled carp. He called himself Captain Balfix, but even Scotty, with his sheltered life, could recognize him for what he was. A retired pirate for hire, a smuggler for certain, and probably much worse. His ship, which had clearly been stolen in the distant past, was a bent old imperial sloop. 50 gold, and we'll be in Athay in 2 days' time," boomed Captain Balfix expansively. "I have 9 gold pieces," replied Scotty, and feeling the need for explanation added, "I had 10, but I gave one to the platform ferryman to get me down here." 9 is just as fine," said the captain agreeably. "Truth be told, I was going to Athay whether you paid me or not. Make yourself comfortable on the boat. We'll be leaving in just a few minutes." Decumus Scotty boarded the vessel, which sat low in the water of the river, stacked high with crates and sacks that spilled out of the hold and galley and onto the deck. Each was marked with stamps advertising the most innocuous substances: copper scraps, lard, ink, high rock meal, marked for cattle, tar, fish jelly. Scotty's imagination reeled, picturing what sorts of illicit imports were truly aboard. It took more than those few minutes for Captain Balfix to haul in the rest of his cargo, but in an hour the anchor was up, and they were sailing downriver towards Athay. The green-grey water barely rippled, only touched by the fingers of the breeze. Lush plant life crowded the banks, obscuring from sight all the animals that sang and roared at one another. Lulled by the serene surroundings, Scotty drifted to sleep. At night he awoke and gratefully accepted some clean clothes and food from Captain Balfix. "Why are you going to Athay, if I may ask?" queried the Bosmer. "I'm meeting a former colleague there. He asked me to come down from the Imperial City where I worked for the Atreus Building Commission to negotiate some contracts." Scotty took another bite of the dried sausages they were sharing for dinner. "We're going to try to repair and refurbish whatever bridges, roads, and other structures that got damaged in the recent war with the Khajiiti. It's been a hard 2 years." The captain nodded his head. "Though I suppose good for me and the likes of you and your friend. Trade routes cut off. Now they think there's going to be war with the Somerset Isles. You heard that?" Scotty shook his head. "I've done my share of smuggling skooma down the coast, even helping some revolutionary types escape the Maine's wrath. But now the wars have made me a legitimate trader, a businessman. The first casualties of war is always the corrupted." Scotty said he was sorry to hear that, and they lapsed into silence, watching the stars and moon's reflection on the still water. The next day, Scotty awoke to find the captain wrapped up in his sail, torpid from alcohol, singing in a low, slurred voice. When he saw Scotty rise, he offered his flagon of Jagger. "I learned my lesson during revelry at Western Cross." The captain laughed and then burst into tears. "I don't want to be legitimate. Other pirates I used to know are still raping and stealing and smuggling and selling nice folk like you into slavery. I swear to you, I never thought the first time that I ran a real shipment of legal goods that my life would turn out like this. Oh, I know, I could go back to it. But Bandar knows not after all I've seen. I'm a ruined man." Scotty helped the weeping Mer out of the sail, murmuring words of reassurance. Then he added, "Forgive me for changing the subject, but where are we?" "Oh," moaned Captain Balfix miserably, "we made good time. Athay's right around the bend in the river." "Then it looks like Athay's on fire," said Scotty, pointing. A great plume of smoke, black as pitch, was rising above the trees. As they drifted around the bend, they next saw the flames, and then the blackened skeletal remains of the village. Dying, blazing villagers leapt from rocks into the river. A cacophony of wailing met their ears, and they could see, roaming along the edges of the town, the figures of Khajiiti soldiers bearing torches. "Bandar bless me," slurred the captain. "The war's back on." "Oh, no," whimpered Scotty. The sloop drifted with the current toward the opposite shore, away from the fiery town. Scotty turned his attention there, and the sanctuary it offered. Just a peaceful arbour, away from the horror. There was a shudder of leaves in 2 of the trees, and a dozen lithe Khajiit dropped to the ground, armed with bows. "They see us," hissed Scotty, "and they've got bows." "Well, of course they have bows," snarled Captain Balfix. "We Bosmer may have invented the bloody things, but we didn't think to keep them secret, you bloody bureaucrat. Now they're setting their arrows on fire. Yes, they do that sometimes. Captain, they're shooting at us. They're shooting at us with flaming arrows." "Ah, so they are," the captain agreed. "The aim here is to avoid being hit." But hit they were, and very shortly thereafter. Even worse, the second volley of arrows hit the supply of pitch, which ignited in a tremendous blue blaze. Scotty grabbed Captain Balfix, and they leapt overboard just before the ship and all its cargo disintegrated. The shock of the cold water brought the Bosmer into temporary sobriety. He called to Scotty, who was already swimming as fast as he could toward the bend. "Master Decimus, where do you think you're swimming to?" "Back to Falinesti," cried Scotty. "It will take you days, and by the time you get there, everyone will know about the attack on Athay. They'll never let anyone they don't know in. The closest village downriver is Grenos. Maybe they'll give us shelter." Scotty swam back to the captain, and side by side they began paddling in the middle of the river, past the burning residuum of the village. He thanked Mara that he had learned to swim. Many a Cyrodiil did not, as largely landlocked as the imperial province was. Had he been raised in Mir Korup or Artemon, he might have been doomed, but the imperial city itself was encircled by water, and every lad and lass there knew how to cross without a boat, even those who grew up to be clerks and not adventurers. Captain Balfix's sobriety faded as he grew used to the water's temperature. Even in wintertide, the Xylo River was fairly temperate, and after a fashion, even comfortable. The Bosmer's strokes were uneven, and he'd stray closer to Scotty and then further away, pushing ahead and then falling behind. Scotty looked to the shore to his right. The flames had caught the trees like tinder. Behind them was an inferno with which they were barely keeping pace. To the shore on their left, all looked fair, until he saw a tremble in the river reeds, and then what caused it. A pride of the largest cats he had ever seen. They were auburn-haired, green-eyed beasts with jaws and teeth to match his wildest nightmares, and they were watching the 2 swimmers and keeping pace. "Captain Balfix, we can't go to either that shore or the other one, or we'll be parboiled or eaten," Scotty whispered. "Try to even your kicking and your strokes, breath like you would normally. If you're feeling tired, tell me, and we'll float on our backs for a while." Anyone who has had the experience of giving rational advice to a drunkard would understand the hopelessness. Scotty kept pace with the captain, slowing himself, quickening, drifting left and right, while the Bosmer moaned old ditties from his pirate days. When he wasn't watching his companion, he watched the cats on the shore. After a stretch, he turned to his right. Another village had caught fire. Undoubtedly, it was Grenos. Scotty stared at the blazing fury, awed by the sight of the destruction, and did not hear that the captain had ceased to sing. When he turned back, Captain Balfix was gone. Scotty dove into the murky depths of the river over and over again. There was nothing to be done. When he surfaced after his final search, he saw that the giant cats had moved on, perhaps assuming that he too had drowned. He continued his lonely swim downriver. A tributary, he noted, had formed a final barrier, keeping the flames from spreading further. But there were no more towns. After several hours, he began to ponder the wisdom of going ashore. Which shore was the question? He was spared the decision. Ahead of him was a rocky island with a bonfire. He did not know if he were intruding on a party of Bosmeri or Khajiiti, only that he could swim no more. With straining, aching muscles, he pulled himself onto the rocks. They were Bosmer refugees, he gathered, even before they told him. Roasting over the fire was the remains of one of the giant cats that had been stalking him through the jungle on the opposite shore. "Sencha tiger," said one of the young warriors ravenously. "It's no animal. It's as smart as any Cathay rat or Ohms or any other bleeding Khajiiti. Pity this one drowned. I would have gladly killed it. You'll like the meat, though. Sweet, from all the sugar these asses eat." Scotty did not know if he was capable of eating a creature as intelligent as a man or Mer, but he surprised himself, as he had done several times over the last days. It was rich, succulent, and sweet, like sugared pork, but no seasonings had been added. He surveyed the crowd as he ate. A sad lot, some still weeping for lost family members. They were the survivors of both the villages of Grenos and Athe, and war was on every person's lips. Why had the Khajiiti attacked again? Why, specifically directed at Scotty as a Cyrodiil? Why was the Emperor not enforcing peace in his provinces? "I was to meet another Cyrodiil," he said to a Bosmer maiden who he understood to be from Athe. "His name was Leodis Jurus. I don't suppose you know what might have happened to him." "I don't know your friend, but there were many Cyrodiils in Athe when the fire came," said the girl. "Some of them, I think, left quickly. They were going to Vindisi, inland, in the jungle. I am going there tomorrow, so are many of us. If you wish, you may come as well." Decumus Scotty nodded solemnly. He made himself as comfortable as he could in the stony ground of the river island, and somehow, after much effort, he fell asleep. But he did not sleep well. "18 Bosmeri and one Cyrodiilic former senior clerk for an imperial building commission trudged through the jungle westward from the Xylo River to the ancient village of Vindisi. For Decumus Scotty, the jungle was hostile, unfamiliar ground. The enormous vermiculated trees filled the bright morning with darkness and resembled nothing so much as grasping claws bent on impeding their progress. Even the fronds of the low plants quivered with malevolent energy. What was worse, he was not alone in his anxiety. His fellow travellers, the natives who had survived the Khajiit attacks on the villages of Grenos and Athe, wore faces of undisguised fear. There was something sentient in the jungle, and not merely the mad, but benevolent indigenous spirits. In his peripheral vision, Scotty could see the shadows of the Khajiiti following the refugees, leaping from tree to tree. When he turned to face them, the lithe forms vanished into the gloom as if they had never been there. But he knew he had seen them, and the Bosmeri saw them too, and quickened their pace. After 18 hours, bitten raw by insects, scratched by 1,000 thorns, they emerged into a valley clearing. It was night, but a row of blazing torches greeted them, illuminating the leather-wrought tents and jumbled stones of the hamlet of Vindisi. At the end of the valley, the torches marked a sacred site, a gnarled bower of trees pressed close together to form a temple. Wordlessly, the Bosmeri walked the torch arcade toward the trees. Scotty followed them. When they reached the solid mass of living wood with only one gaping portal, Scotty could see a dim blue light glowing within. A low, sonorous moan from 100 voices echoed within. The Bosmeri maiden he had been following held out her hand, stopping him. "You do not understand, but no outsider, not even a friend, may enter," she said. "This is a holy place." Scotty nodded and watched the refugees march into the temple, heads bowed. Their voices joined with the ones within. When the last wood elf had gone inside, Scotty turned his attention back to the village. There must be food to be had somewhere. A tendril of smoke and a faint whiff of roasting venison beyond the torchlight led him. They were 5 Cyrodiils, 2 Bretons, and a Nord. The group gathered around a campfire of glowing white stones, pulling steaming strips of meat from the cadaver of a great stag. At Scotty's approach, they rose up, all but the Nord, who was distracted by his hunk of animal flesh. "Good evening. Sorry to interrupt, but I was wondering if I might have a little something to eat. I'm afraid I'm rather hungry after walking all day with some refugees from Grenos and Athe." They bade him to sit down and eat, and introduced themselves. "So the war's back on, it seems," said Scotty amiably. "Best thing for these effete do-nothings," replied the Nord in between bites. "I've never seen such a lazy culture. Now they've got the Khajiiti striking them on land and the high elves at sea. If there's any province that deserves a little distress, it's damnable Valenwood." "I don't see how they're so offensive to you," laughed one of the Bretons. "They're congenital thieves, even worse than the Khajiiti, because they are so blessed meek in their aggression." The Nord spat out a gob of fat, which sizzled on the hot stones of the fire. "They spread their forests into territory that doesn't belong to them, slowly infiltrating their neighbours, and they're puzzled when elsewhere shoves back at them. They're all villains of the worst order." "What are you doing here?" asked Scotty. "I'm a diplomat from the court of Gehenna," muttered the Nord, returning to his food. "What about you? What are you doing here?" asked one of the Cyrodiils. "I work for Lord Atreus's building commission in the Imperial City," said Scotty. "One of my former colleagues suggested that I come down to Valenwood. He said the war was over, and I could contract a great deal of business for my firm rebuilding what was lost. One disaster after another, and I've lost all my money. I'm in the middle of a rekindling of war, and I cannot find my former colleague." "Your former colleague," murmured another of the Cyrodiils, who had introduced himself as Reglius. "He wasn't by any chance named Leodes Jurus, was he? You know him?" "He lured me down to Valenwood in nearly the exact same circumstances," smiled Reglius grimly. "I worked for your employer's competitor, Lord Vanek's men, where Leodes Jurus also formerly worked. He wrote to me, asking that I represent an imperial building commission and contract some post-war construction. I had just been released from my employment, and I thought that if I brought some new business, I could have my job back. Jurus and I met in Athe, and he said he was going to arrange a very lucrative meeting with the Sylvanar." Scotty was stunned. "Where is he now?" "I'm no theologian, so I couldn't say," Reglius shrugged. "He's dead. When the Khajiiti attacked Athe, they began by torching the harbour where Jurus was readying his boat, or, I should say, my boat, since it was purchased with the gold I brought. By the time we were even aware of what was happening enough to flee, everything by the water was ash. The Khajiiti may be animals, but they know how to arrange an attack." "I think they followed us through the jungle to Vindisi," said Scotty nervously. "There was definitely a group of something jumping along the treetops." "Probably one of the monkey folk," snorted the Nord. "Nothing to be concerned about." "When we first came to Vindisi and the Bosmeri all entered that tree, they were furious, whispering something about unleashing an ancient terror on their enemies." The Breton shivered, remembering. "They've been there ever since, for over a day and a half now. If you want something to be afraid of, that's the direction to look." The other Breton, who was a representative of the Daggerfall Mages Guild, was staring off into the darkness while his fellow provincial spoke. "Maybe, but there's something in the jungle too, right on the edge of the village looking in." More refugees, maybe? Asked Scotty, trying to keep the alarm out his voice. Not unless they're travelling through the trees now, whispered the wizard. The Nord and one of the Cyrodiils grabbed a long tarp of wet leather and pulled it across the fire, instantly extinguishing it without so much as a sizzle. Now Scotty could see the intruders, their elliptical yellow eyes and long, cruel blades catching the torchlight. He froze with fear, praying that he too was not so visible to them. He felt something bump against his back and gasped. Reglius's voice hissed from up above, "Be quiet for Mara's sake and climb up here." Scotty grabbed hold of the knotted double vine that hung down from a tall tree at the edge of the dead campfire. He scrambled up it as quickly as he could, holding his breath lest any grunt of exertion escape him. At the top of the vine, high above the village, was an abandoned nest from some great bird in a trident-shaped branch. As soon as Scotty had pulled himself into the soft, fragrant straw, Reglius pulled up the vine. No one else was there, and when Scotty looked down, he could see no one below. No one, that is, except the Khajiit, slowly moving toward the glow of the temple tree. "Thank you," whispered Scotty, deeply touched that a competitor had helped him. He turned away from the village and saw that the tree's upper branches brushed against the mossy rock walls that surrounded the valley below. "How are you at climbing?" "You're mad," said Reglius under his breath. "We should stay here until they leave. If they burn Vindisi like they did Athay and Grenos, we'll be dead sure as if we were on the ground." Scotty began the slow, careful climb up the tree, testing each branch. "Can you see what they're doing?" "I can't really tell." Reglius stared down into the gloom. "They're at the front of the temple. I think they also have... It looks like long ropes, trailing off behind them, off into the pass." Scotty crawled onto the strongest branch that pointed toward the wet, rocky face of the cliff. It was not a far jump at all, so close, in fact, that he could smell the moisture and feel the coolness of the stone. But it was a jump, nevertheless, and in his history as a clerk he had never before leapt from a tree 100 feet off the ground to a sheer rock. He pictured in his mind's eye the shadows that had pursued him through the jungle from the heights above, how their legs coiled to spring, how their arms snapped forward in an elegant fluid motion to grasp. He leapt, his hands grappled for rock, but long, thick cords of moss were more accessible. He held hard, but when he tried to plant his feet forward, they slipped up skyward. For a few seconds he found himself upside down before he managed to pull himself into a more conventional position. There was a narrow outcropping jutting out of the cliff where he could stand and finally exhale. "Reglius, Reglius, Reglius." Scotty did not dare to call out. In a minute there was a shaking of branches, and Lord Vanek's man emerged. First his satchel, then his head, then the rest of him. Scotty started to whisper something, but Reglius shook his head violently and pointed downward. One of the Khajiit was at the base of the tree, peering at the remains of the campfire. Reglius awkwardly tried to balance himself on the branch, but as strong as it was exceedingly difficult with only one free hand. Scotty cupped his palms and then pointed at the satchel. It seemed to pain Reglius to let it out of his grasp, but he relented and tossed it to Scotty. There was a small, almost invisible hole in the bag, and when Scotty caught it, a single gold coin dropped out. It rang as it bounced against the rock wall on the descent, a high, soft sound that seemed like the loudest alarm Scotty had ever heard. Then many things happened very quickly. The Cathay-Rat at the base of the tree looked up and gave a loud wail. The other Khajiit followed in chorus as the cat below crouched down and then sprung up into the lower branches. Reglius saw it below him, climbing up with impossible dexterity, and panicked. Even before he jumped, Scotty could tell that he was going to fall. With a cry, Reglius the clerk plunged to the ground, breaking his neck on impact. A flash of white fire erupted from every crevice of the temple, and the moan of the Bosmeri prayer changed into something terrible and otherworldly. The climbing Cathay-Rat stopped and stared. "Kirgo!" it gasped. "The wild hunt!" It was as if a crack in reality had opened wide. A flood of horrific beasts, tentacled toads, insects of armor and spine, gelatinous serpents, vaporous beings with the face of gods, all poured forth from the great hollow tree, blind with fury. They tore the Khajiit in front of the temple to pieces. All the other cats fled for the jungle, but as they did so, they began pulling on the ropes they carried. In a few seconds' time, the entire village of Vindisi was boiling with the lunatic apparitions of the wild hunt. Over the babbling, barking, howling horde, Scotty heard the Cyrodiils in hiding cry out as they were devoured. The Nord too was found and eaten, and both Bretons. The wizard had turned himself invisible, but the swarm did not rely on their sight. The tree the Cathay Rat was in began to sway and rock from the impossible violence beneath it. Scotty looked at the Khajiiti's fear-struck eyes and held out one of the cords of moss. The cat's face showed its pitiful gratitude as it leapt for the vine. It didn't have time to entirely replace that expression when Scotty pulled back the cord and watched it fall. The hunt consumed it to the bone before it struck the ground. Scotty's own jump up to the next outcropping of rock was immeasurably more successful. From there, he pulled himself to the top of the cliff and was able to look down into the chaos that had been the village of Vindisi. The hunt's mass had grown and began to spill out through the pass out of the valley, pursuing the fleeing Khajiiti. It was then that the madness truly began. In the moon's light, from Scotty's vantage, he could see where the Khajiiti had attached their ropes. With a thunderous boom, an avalanche of boulders poured over the pass. When the dust cleared, he saw that the valley had been sealed. The wild hunt had nowhere to turn but on itself. Scotty turned his head, unable to bear to look at the cannibalistic orgy. The night jungle stood before him, a web of wood. He slung Reglius's satchel over his shoulder and entered.